What if I said to you that death may be one of your greatest friends? What if I said to you that death can teach you so much about life and living? So many of us never want to think about death, either the death of people we love or our own death. But today I'd like to share with you some stories of my own life and how death has taught me so much about living. But first, a question for you. What if you had a finite time to live? Maybe a year. What would you do with that time? What would be important to you? I think it's very important to ask ourselves these questions. 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to take a totally new direction in my life. It was a very painful direction, but at the same time, like so many things, it yielded so much beauty as well. So 20 years ago, I was the mother of 3 small children, and my husband was living with cancer. He was fighting cancer. And at one point, I'd had a life that I was building, and now suddenly my life was full of uncertainty, full of pain, full of anguish about what was going to happen. So I went to see a woman that I knew who had many, many years before been diagnosed with leukemia and given 6 months to live. She recovered quite miraculously and went on to spend much of her life, and she still is doing this in her 70s, helping people who have life-threatening illnesses. So I went to see her, and we were sitting in her small office with some pictures on the walls, some beautiful little children's drawings on the notice board, and a beautiful piece of light just coming through the window at an angle onto the floor. And in this very sacred and peaceful place, I told her everything that I resented and despaired about the life that I was living and where it was going. And what should I do about my husband's cancer? And she said to me something that still shocks me today. And it certainly shocked me very deeply at the time. She said, "What do you think are the gifts of cancer?" I didn't say it aloud, but the swear words were forming in my mind. What on earth is she talking about? How can there possibly be any gifts in a situation like mine? And yet, when I looked into her eyes, I saw her serious intent. I knew instinctively that a woman who had traveled the journey that she had traveled knew more than I did. What were the gifts of my situation? So I began to talk in a slightly different way and said, well, maybe it's really good because my husband and I are getting to spend a lot of time together. Maybe we don't actually worry or fight or argue or discuss the things that actually don't matter anymore. Maybe we appreciate a beautiful sunset together. Maybe we appreciate a beautiful piece of music even more because we don't know how many times we will be able to do this in our lives. The truth is, none of us know how many times we will be able to do these things. We take for granted that our future will just continue in a finite way. That what we plan will come to reality. We don't ever think that these things may not happen. And we don't want to think that these things may not happen, because that will fill us full of fear. The idea that our life is limited, the idea that we have a mortality of some kind, that some of us will die before we're ready to, that some of us will die when we are too young to die. And none of us know. When I had finished explaining to my friend perhaps all the things that I hadn't thought of as gifts, she said to me, "Why don't you think about cancer in another way? Perhaps it's like a little bird on your shoulder that is reminding you how to live." I walked out of that room that day, almost 25 years ago now, 22 years, and I have never, ever forgotten that moment. And every day I live with a bird on my shoulder. And the bird is saying to me, does it really matter? Is it worth getting upset or excited in a negative way about this? What should you really be focusing on? What should you really care about? There's no great secret that eventually my husband died. And I can't think of any journey that we can take in life that reflects more deeply and more profoundly the idea of less is more. Because when you think about the journey to death, it is a letting go of everything. Everything. You don't know what you can live without until you live without it. And as many speakers have talked today about our addictions to social media and our addictions to distraction, there is something about the idea of our own mortality that somewhat sharpens the mind. Let's think of it another way. What if you had 6 months to live or 6 weeks to live? What would you spend your time doing? Now, it's really useful to ask yourself this question, because your answer will tell you what you need to be doing with your life, or what you need to be doing more of in your life. And once again, death, or the presence of death, or the idea of your own mortality can be a wonderful friend. It can be a bird on your shoulder, reminding you how to live by your own values in the way that actually works for you. I've had the privilege of watching 2 people die. That sounds slightly maudlin, but I was caring for them. I've had the enormous privilege of walking along that high road, the ups and downs, the anguish, the fear, the sadness, the physical deterioration, all of the things that we think would be just so appalling and terrible. But having said that, they have been some of the happiest moments of my life. And I'll try and illustrate one small story to explain why that was. My husband was increasingly ill, and then at one point largely unable to walk. He had been a sailor, a horse rider, a mountaineer, a man just full of adventure. And one morning I went to take him a cup of tea, and he was sitting up in bed with a large hardback book propped up on his knees called Mountaineering by a very famous mountaineer called Chris Bonington. And there were photographs in there of beautiful snow-capped peaks and amazing mountains. And there he is, sitting, dreaming of mountains. Because being on a mountain, conquering a mountain, which is really to conquer yourself, was one of the great joys of his life. And as I handed him his cup of tea, I said, "Jules, it's snowing." And he put the book aside and started to look out of the window. I expected him to complain. I expected him to complain about the frost on his newly planted fruit trees. I expected him to worry about whether there was enough antifreeze in the car. I expected him to have a slightly negative reaction. But instead, he looked out of the window. And then slowly he said, "It's snowing." And then even more slowly, he repeated it. And as I watched him watch the snow, I was so deeply moved, because in the context of his farewell to all that he knew and the life that he was leading, it was as though he was suddenly seeing the snow in all its magnificence, in all its simplicity, for the very first time. And it was a moment, strangely enough, of extraordinary joy. The night that he died, I avoided going upstairs to our bedroom. There were many other family members there, and I did not want to go upstairs because I knew what was waiting. And I had a feeling, as it turned out correctly, that he was waiting for me. Eventually I went upstairs, and in the room were several of our family members, and also in the shadows, many, many other people, beings, spirits. It's very hard to describe what I saw and experienced, but the room was crowded with people. And in that moment, I felt so strongly that these were people who had loved Julian in his life and had already left this life. So I sat down by his side and held his hand. And I said, "Jules, we all love you. And if you need to go, we're ready. And we're going to be all right." And even as I said those words with all the confidence I could muster, I could feel myself pressing down on a volcano of tears. Please don't go. Don't leave me. A few moments later, I felt him take a deep in-breath. And then I was filled with the most extraordinary sense of joy I have ever experienced. And I looked round the room at the faces of the people in the room to see if something had happened that I should be feeling this way. And then I realized that it actually wasn't my joy that I was experiencing. It was his. It was his joy. I was experiencing, in some strange way, the moment of his death. And I was, in that moment, and have been ever since, awestruck by the possibility of this beautiful truth. The idea that death is an incredibly beautiful experience. I think it's really worth thinking about these things, not in a depressing way, but as a way of helping us to mark our lives, as a way of helping us to make good decisions. And as many people have spoken today about this idea of focus, because what you focus on expands. What you focus on becomes your life. In the days of Julian's illness, his death, and the aftermath, I began to simplify my life even more than I had before. I didn't want to watch the news particularly. I didn't really want to listen to gossip. I didn't particularly want to waste my time with people that didn't understand me or that I wasn't close to. I absolutely pared down my life. And then my favorite activity of every day became watching the clouds in the sky. I learned to love the comfort of the sky. The comfort of nature, because nature never lies. Nature does not get distracted by social media. Nature is always itself, and it is dying, it is being reborn, it is ending, it is beginning, it is breaking, and it is mending in this ever circular spiral of life. And strangely enough, even though part of that cycle is death, it is actually a strangely comforting part of my world vision or my vision of life. So now I try and step up a little bit closer to these truths about my own mortality, about the mortality of others. When the time comes, I don't want to be afraid. When the time comes, I want to die a good death, which means I must start now. Because to die a good death, you must have lived a good life, to know what death is going to mean to you when you finally embrace it. And perhaps, as I hope for all of us, feel that moment of absolutely beautiful, beautiful joy. Socrates said that death is one of life's greatest blessings. Rather than ignore it, rather than pretend it doesn't exist, I would ask you today just to consider for a moment, embracing it, thinking about it, making it work for you, making it the catalyst for something magnificent in your own life, to make it the greatest blessing that you can have apart from living. Thank you.